The laboratory smelled of alien soil and growing things. Dr. Amira Okonkwo carefully lifted a small purple flower from its container and examined its roots under the magnifying lens. 3 months on orbital station Kessler, 7, and she had finally managed to grow the first successful hybrid of Terran wheat and Kelosi grain. Her daughter would be so proud when she told her. Amira smiled at the thought of Zara, only 4 years old, probably driving her grandmother crazy back on Earth right now. 3 more months, and she would be home. 3 more months of quiet work in this rented lab on the edge of human space, surrounded by species who barely noticed her existence. That was fine with Amira. She did not need attention. She needed her plants, her research, and the knowledge that somewhere in the future, her work might help feed colonies on worlds where Terran crops could not grow. The station hummed with the sounds of commerce. Hundreds of species traded here, bought and sold, made deals and broke them. Amira ignored all of it. She was a scientist, not a diplomat or a merchant. She had no enemies and no friends on the station. She was, by every measure that mattered to the galaxy, completely unimportant. The Dravosi did not agree. Commander Rel then stood in the observation deck above the trade floor, watching the human woman through the transparent ceiling of her laboratory. He was young for his rank, ambitious beyond his experience, and hungry to prove himself to the High Council. The Dravosi were a proud species, warriors and conquerors who had ruled their sector for 10,000 years before humans even discovered fire. Now these soft, short-lived creatures were spreading across the galaxy like a disease. They traded with everyone. They made friends with everyone. They were kind and helpful and utterly weak. And yet somehow they kept gaining influence, kept growing stronger, kept making the Dravosi look slow and outdated. Relthan's mentor on the High Council had given him a simple mission. Send a message. Remind the humans that they are not safe everywhere. Remind them that the galaxy still belongs to the old powers. Choose someone unimportant. Make it look like an accident. Let fear do the rest. Amira Okonkwo was perfect. A scientist with no connections. A woman working alone. A human who would not be missed by anyone who mattered. Rel then watched her tend her flowers, and he felt nothing. The accident happened at midnight station time. A chemical storage unit malfunctioned. Toxic gases flooded the laboratory. By the time the station's automated systems detected the leak, Dr. Amira Okonkwo was dead. The station administrator, a weary Kelosi named Brandt, filed the standard report. Equipment failure. Tragique accident. Condolences to the family. He had seen deaths before, and he would see deaths again. The galaxy was a dangerous place, and sometimes people simply died. Earth received the notification 6 hours later. A routine message, sent through routine channels, reporting the routine death of one of their citizens abroad. The official response was equally routine. A request for the body to be returned. Arrangements for transport. A note expressing gratitude for the station's cooperation. But something else was happening in the dark rooms beneath the surface of official communication that Earth's intelligence division had been monitoring Dravosi communications for decades. Not because they suspected anything specific, but because humans monitored everyone. It was what they did. Quietly. Patiently. Without anyone ever knowing. Within hours of Amira's death, analysts had pieced together the truth. Commander Relthan's orders. The High Council's approval. The deliberate murder of an innocent woman to send a political message. The intelligence report landed on the desk of Director Patricia Okafor at 3 in the morning. She read it twice, then sat in silence for a long time. When she finally spoke, it was to issue a single order. Wake everyone up. By dawn, every major government on Earth had been briefed. The response was not what the Dravosi would have expected. There was no outrage, no demands for justice, no threats of war or sanctions. There was only a quiet, cold consensus that spread through every agency and every military branch like frost across a window. The Dravosi had made a mistake. They believed that killing an unimportant human would have no consequences. They believed that Earth would mourn and move on. They believed that humans were soft. They were about to learn otherwise. Director Okafor pulled a file from her archives. It contained everything humanity knew about the Dravosi: their biology, their agriculture, their medicine, their supply chains, their weaknesses. She had maintained this file for 15 years, updating it quietly, hoping she would never need to use it. Now she needed it. Across Earth, scientists were receiving encrypted messages. Geneticists, biologists, agricultural experts, engineers. Each message contained the same simple question: are you willing to serve? Dr. Samuel Wright, 73 years old and happily retired, read his message in his garden. He had spent his career studying crop diseases and how to stop them. Now, someone was asking if he could do the opposite. He thought about the young woman who had died on a space station, surrounded by alien plants she would never see bloom. He thought about her daughter, who would grow up without a mother. He thought about the Dravosi, who believed they could murder with impunity. Doctor Wright typed his response. Tell me what you need. On orbital station Kessler 7, Commander Relden celebrated with his officers. The mission was complete. The message was sent. Humans would learn their place, and the Dravosi would continue their rightful dominance of the galaxy. He could not see the shadow that was already falling across his entire species. He could not hear the quiet hum of human patience beginning its long, slow work. Amira Okonkwo was buried on Earth 3 weeks later. Her daughter placed a purple flower on her grave. The Dravosi had killed one human. Earth had begun its response. The Galactic Council chamber fell silent when a human ambassador rose to speak. Representatives from 47 species leaned forward, expecting fury, expecting demands, expecting the emotional outburst that humans were so famous for. Ambassador Wei Lin smiled politely and began discussing trade tariffs. Counselor Harath of the Dravosi watched from her elevated seat, her 4 eyes narrowing with confusion. She had prepared responses to accusations. She had rehearsed denials. She had armed herself with legal arguments and diplomatic maneuvering. None of it was necessary. The human said nothing about Amira Okonkwo. Not a word, not a whisper, not even a meaningful glance in the direction of the Dravosi delegation. When the session ended, Harath approached the human ambassador. Wei Lin greeted her with the same warm smile she gave everyone, exchanged pleasantries about the weather on both their homeworlds, and wished her a pleasant evening. Harath returned to her quarters deeply unsettled. This was not how grieving species behaved. This was not normal. But perhaps, she thought, the humans simply did not care as much about their people as other species did. Perhaps they were truly as soft and accepting as the Dravosi believed. Commander Relden certainly believed it. His report to the High Council was confident and proud. The mission was a complete success. Humans had received the message and chosen submission over confrontation. The Dravosi could continue their expansion without concern. The High Council agreed. Perhaps it was time to send more messages. Other species had grown too comfortable with human friendship. A few more accidents might remind everyone where the real power in the galaxy resided. They could not see what was happening on Earth in a classified facility beneath the Swiss Alps. Director Patricia Okafor stood before a wall of screens showing data streams from across the galaxy. Around her sat the leaders of 17 intelligence agencies, each representing a different nation, all united in a purpose that transcended borders. This was the Silent Council. It had no official name, no public acknowledgement, no paper trail. It existed for moments exactly like this one. Dr. Samuel Wright presented his findings. He spoke in the calm, measured tones of a scientist discussing an interesting problem rather than the destruction of a civilization. The Dravosi, he explained, had a weakness they did not know about. Their primary food crop, a grain called vestan, was genetically narrow. Thousands of years of selective breeding had created a monoculture that was highly productive but dangerously vulnerable. One carefully designed pathogen could spread through their entire agricultural system within months. Another scientist presented research on Dravosi respiratory biology. Their lungs were efficient but sensitive. A particular compound, harmless to most species, would cause chronic inflammation in Dravosi tissue. Not deadly, just debilitating, just enough to reduce their effectiveness without raising alarms. An engineer explained how Dravosi FTL communication relied on a network of relay stations with a specific software architecture. The same architecture contained a flaw that could be exploited to cause random failures, delays, and corrupted transmissions. Each presentation was clinical, professional, utterly devoid of emotion. These were not acts of passion or revenge. They were engineering problems with engineering solutions. Director Okafor listened to each report, asked clarifying questions, and made notes. When the presentations were complete, she stood and addressed the room. They were not going to war with the Dravosi. War would be noticed. War would invite intervention. War would make humanity look like the aggressor. Instead, they were going to be patient. They were going to be helpful. They were going to watch the Dravosi fall apart from the inside, while offering sympathetic aid at every opportunity. And no one would ever know. No one would ever suspect. And when it was over, every species in the galaxy would understand, without being told, that killing a human had consequences. The Silent Council voted unanimously to proceed. Over the following weeks, small things began to happen. A shipment of agricultural equipment arrived at a Dravosi colony world, donated by a human charity. Inside the equipment were spores, dormant and undetectable, waiting for the right conditions to activate. That a Dravosi military installation received new atmospheric filters, purchased from a company that had recently been acquired by a human investment group. The filters worked perfectly, except for a trace compound in the filtering membrane that would slowly degrade Dravosi lung tissue. A software update was pushed to communication relay stations across Dravosi space. The update contained a hidden routine that would cause random packet loss, always at the worst possible moments. None of these events were connected. None of them were traceable. Each one appeared to be exactly what it claimed to be: ordinary commerce, ordinary technology, ordinary life in a complex galaxy. The Dravosi suspected nothing. On orbital station Kessler 7, the laboratory where Amira Okonkwo had died was rented by a new tenant, a human botanist who smiled at everyone, kept to herself, and tended her plants in peaceful solitude. She was not a spy. She was not an agent. She was simply a scientist doing her work, just as Amira had been. But someone was watching over her now. Someone was always watching over every human, everywhere in the galaxy. Commander Rel then received a promotion for his successful mission. He celebrated with his family, dreaming of future glory in the classified facility beneath the Swiss Alps. Director Okafor placed a small photograph on her desk. It showed Amira Okonkwo smiling in her laboratory, surrounded by alien flowers. That we remember, she thought, and we are patient. The farmer noticed it first. A small patch of yellowing stalks in the eastern field, spreading outward like a bruise on green skin. He reported it to the Agricultural Ministry, expecting a routine fungicide treatment and nothing more. Within 3 days, the yellow patch had become a yellow field. Within a week, it had become a yellow province. Within a month, the entire agricultural world of Vestan 4 was dying. Dravosi scientists descended on the planet in a panic. They had never seen anything like this fungus. It moved through the soil like fire through dry grass, jumping from root system to root system, leaving withered stalks and barren earth behind. Every treatment they tried failed. Every quarantine measure proved useless. The fungus did not just kill the Thessan grain. It killed everything. It destroyed the very soil, leaving behind a lifeless dust that could not support even the hardiest weeds. Administrator Kellis stood in the middle of what had been the most productive farmland on the planet. Now it was a desert. The wind blew gray dust into his face as he listened to the head scientist explain that they had no solution, no understanding, and no hope. How? He asked quietly. Could this happen? They had been growing Thess sand for 10,000 years. Their agricultural science was the envy of the sector. How could a simple fungus defeat everything they knew? The scientist had no answer. News of the crisis spread to the Dravosi homeworld. The High Council convened emergency sessions, demanding explanations that no one could provide. They sent messages to allied species, requesting agricultural aid and expertise. The humans responded immediately. A team of human agricultural specialists arrived on Thessan 4 within days, led by a kind-faced woman named Dr. Helena Ross. She expressed deep sympathy for the Dravosi crisis and promised that humanity would do everything possible to help their friends overcome this terrible tragedy. Dr. Ross and her team studied the fungus extensively. They took samples. They ran tests. They consulted with experts back on Earth. After 3 weeks of intensive research, she delivered her report to Administrator Kelleth with genuine sadness in her voice. The fungus was unlike anything in recorded galactic history. It appeared to be a natural mutation, possibly triggered by environmental stress or cosmic radiation. Unfortunately, it was perfectly adapted to Thessan biology. Human science could not find a cure. However, she added hopefully, humans could provide food aid to help the Dravosi through this difficult period. Earth's farms were productive, and humanity believed in helping those in need. Administrator Kelleth accepted the offer with grateful relief. Human grain shipments began arriving within weeks, preventing the immediate crisis from becoming a famine. But the fungus continued to spread. It jumped to another agricultural world, then another. The same yellow death that had consumed Thessan 4 appeared on 5 colonies within 3 months. Dravosi scientists worked frantically, but every attempt to contain the outbreak failed. The galactic community watched with concern. The Galactic Council offered research assistance. The Colosi provided emergency food supplies. The Tandari sent medical teams to help with the growing health crisis caused by malnutrition. And the humans kept helping. Always present, always sympathetic, always sorry that their best efforts could not stop the spread. On the Dravosi homeworld, rationing began. Citizens who had never known hunger stood in lines for basic food allocations. The proud warrior culture that had dominated the sector for millennia was reduced to depending on charity from species they had once dismissed as inferior. Commander Relvin, now promoted to fleet commander, led a task force to investigate whether the fungus was a weapon. He searched for evidence of sabotage, for any sign that an enemy had attacked Dravosi agriculture deliberately. He found nothing. The fungus appeared completely natural. Its genetic structure showed no signs of artificial manipulation. Its spread pattern followed predictable ecological models. Every scientific analysis confirmed that the Dravosi were simply victims of terrible luck. Relvin reported his findings to the High Council with frustration. They had enemies everywhere, he insisted. Someone must be responsible. This could not be coincidence. Counselor Harath listened to his report in silence. She did not share his certainty. Something about this crisis bothered her, but she could not identify what it was. Late at night, she found herself looking at old files. Trade agreements, diplomatic records, immigration data. She searched for patterns without knowing what she was searching for. Her eye fell on a small notation in a routine status report from Orbital Station Kessler 7. A human scientist had died there 8 months ago. Equipment failure. Tragic accident. Harath stared at the entry for a long time. She thought about the humans who were now everywhere in Dravosi space, helping with the crisis, always so kind, always so concerned. She thought about how Earth had said nothing when their citizen died. A cold feeling settled in her stomach. It was probably nothing, she told herself. Coincidence. Bad luck. The humans were helping. They were friends, but the cold feeling did not go away. On Earth, Director Okafor received the latest status report. The fungus was performing exactly as designed. Dravosi food production had dropped by 40% and would continue falling. Phase 1 was complete. She opened a new file labeled with a simple designation. Phase 2, the next shipment of atmospheric filters, was already being prepared. Fleet Commander Relvin woke, gasping for breath. His lungs burned as if filled with fire. Each inhale a struggle that left him dizzy and weak. The medical officer, standing beside his bed, wore an expression he had never seen before on a military physician. Fear. The illness had appeared 3 weeks ago at Forward Base Kethrin. A few soldiers with breathing difficulties, easily dismissed as minor infections. Then a few hundred. Then a few thousand. Now every major military installation across Dravosi space was reporting the same symptoms. Chronic inflammation of the respiratory tissue, reduced oxygen absorption, soldiers who could barely walk without exhaustion. Rel then forced himself to sit up despite the pain. "What is happening?" he demanded. "What is attacking us?" The medical officer explained that they did not know. The illness did not behave like any known pathogen. It did not spread from person to person. It appeared independently in different locations simultaneously, as if the air itself had become toxic to Dravosi biology. They had traced the outbreak to the atmospheric filtration systems in military installations. Something in the filters was causing the reaction, but the filters had been purchased through normal supply chains, manufactured by reputable companies, inspected and certified by standard protocols. Nothing was wrong with them. And yet everything was wrong. Rel then dismissed the medical officer and lay back against his pillow, struggling to breathe. His once powerful body felt weak and useless. The fleet he commanded was crippled, its crews too sick to maintain combat readiness. Across Dravosi space, the military was collapsing from within. The High Council met in emergency session for the third time that month. Agricultural crisis, medical crisis, and now, something even more disturbing. The FTL communication network was failing. Messages between colonies were being delayed by hours, sometimes days. Critical orders arrived corrupted and unreadable. Coordination between distant systems had become nearly impossible. Technical teams reported that the relay stations were experiencing random software failures. The code appeared to be glitching spontaneously, causing packet loss and transmission errors. They had tried rebooting the systems, reinstalling the software, even replacing entire stations. Nothing worked. One technician suggested, hesitantly, that the failures seemed almost deliberate, as if someone had designed them to look random while actually targeting the most critical communications at the worst possible times. The High Council dismissed this suggestion as paranoia. Who could possibly have access to their communication infrastructure? Who would have the capability to sabotage systems across dozens of light years without being detected? But the failures continued. Counselor Harath had stopped attending the emergency sessions. She spent her days in the archives instead, reading through old reports and building a timeline that no one had asked her to build. The human scientist's death. 8 months before the first crop failures. Earth's complete silence in response. The arrival of human agricultural aid, perfectly timed, perfectly inadequate to solve the problem. The respiratory illness appearing in military installations that had recently received new equipment. The communication failures spreading through infrastructure that relied on software components from companies with complex ownership structures. Harath traced those ownership structures through layers of subsidiaries and holding companies. In 7 different cases, she found the same pattern. Human investment groups had acquired small stakes in critical suppliers within the past 2 years. Her hands trembled as she compiled her findings. This was not evidence. It was barely even circumstantial suspicion. Every piece could be explained by coincidence, by bad luck, by the simple complexity of galactic commerce. But together, they formed a picture that made her blood run cold. She requested an audience with the High Council and presented her theory. The humans are doing this. They had killed the scientist, blamed it on the Dravosi, and then systematically attacked every vulnerability in Dravosi civilization. The council listened in silence. Then they dismissed her. Impossible, the senior counselor declared. Humans were soft creatures who relied on diplomacy and trade. They lacked the patience for such a complex operation. They lacked the ruthlessness. And even if they were capable, there was no evidence. No proof. Nothing but the paranoid suspicions of an aging counselor who had clearly spent too much time in the archives. Harath left the chamber in disgrace. But she did not abandon her investigation. Instead, she sent a private message to the human embassy requesting a personal meeting with Director Patricia Okafor. She had read that name in several of the files. A senior intelligence official who had been present on Earth when the scientist died. The response came within hours. Director Okafor would be honored to meet with Counselor Harath at her convenience. A neutral location was suggested. Privacy was guaranteed. Harath read the message several times. The speed of the response, the willingness to meet, the careful formality of the language. She knew, in that moment, that she was right, that on a dying agricultural world, Relvin stood in the ruins of what had been his family's ancestral farm. The fields that had fed his ancestors for generations were now great dust, blown away by the wind. His lungs ached. His career was over. His people were starving and sick and isolated from each other by failing technology. Somewhere in his mind, a memory stirred. A report he had filed a year ago. A successful mission. A message sent to remind humans of their place. For the first time, Commander Relvin wondered if that message had been received differently than he intended. For the first time, he felt afraid. The meeting took place on a small trading station in neutral space, far from prying eyes and listening devices. Counselor Harath arrived first, her 4 eyes scanning the empty conference room with nervous anticipation. She had not told anyone where she was going. Director Patricia Okafor entered precisely on time, alone and unarmed. She was smaller than Harath had expected, a gray-haired woman with calm brown eyes and hands that showed the calluses of someone who had once done physical work. She smiled warmly and extended her hand in the human gesture of greeting. Harath did not take it. They sat across from each other at a simple metal table. The silence stretched between them like a blade. Harath spoke first. She laid out everything she had discovered. The timeline, the investments, the equipment failures, the agricultural collapse, the respiratory illness, the communication breakdown. 2 years of catastrophe that had reduced the Dravosi from a proud empire to a starving, isolated collection of dying worlds. When she finished, Director Okafor said nothing. She simply waited. "Did you do this?" Harath demanded. "Did humans destroy my people?" Okafor's expression did not change. Her voice remained soft and kind. She explained that Earth valued all life, that humans believed in justice, that they were a peaceful species who preferred diplomacy and cooperation. Harath slammed her fist on the table. "Enough lies. Tell me the truth." For the first time, something flickered in Okafor's eyes. Not anger, not fear, something much colder. She leaned forward slightly and asked a question of her OWND. "Oh, you remember Dr. Amira Okonkwo?" Harath felt her blood freeze. The scientist, the accident, the beginning of everything. Okafor continued in that same soft voice. Amira was 34 years old. She was a xenobiologist studying plant hybridization. She had a daughter named Zara, who was 4 years old when her mother died. She had no enemies. She had no political connections. She was murdered because a young Dravosi commander wanted to send a message. The Dravosi believed that humans were soft, Okafor said. They believed that killing an unimportant woman would have no consequences. They believed we would mourn and move on. Harath could not speak. "Earth does not forget," Okafor continued. "We do not forgive. And we do not need armies or weapons to end those who harm our people. We are patient. We are thorough. And when we decide to act, no one sees us coming until it is far too late." For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Harath asked the only question that mattered anymore. "What do you want?" Okafor reached into her jacket and withdrew a small photograph. She slid it across the table to Harath. The image showed a young woman with dark skin and kind eyes, smiling in a laboratory full of alien plants. She looked happy. She looked alive. "The Dravosi will publicly confess to the murder of Amira Okonkwo," Okafor said. "You will acknowledge that her death was not an accident, but an assassination ordered by your High Council. You will pay reparations to her family. You will rename your primary agricultural research institute in her honor. And you will remember, for the rest of your civilization's existence, that every human matters." Harath stared at the photograph. "What happens if we refuse?" she asked quietly. Okafor stood to leave. "If you refuse," she said simply, "then you continue to experience bad luck. More crop failures, more illness, more communication problems, more isolated colonies that lose contact with your homeworld and never reconnect. Eventually, the Dravosi will be reduced to a single dying planet, forgotten by a galaxy that will barely notice your disappearance." She paused at the door. "But we hope you will not refuse. We take no pleasure in what we have done. Amira was a kind person who wanted only to help others. She would not have wanted this. Then why, Harath whispered. Because kindness without strength is just weakness, Okafor replied. And weakness invites predators. Earth cannot afford to be weak. Not when we have children like Zura who deserve to grow up in a galaxy that understands the cost of harming a human. She left without another word. Harath sat alone in the empty room for a long time, staring at the photograph of a dead woman she had never met. She thought about the High Council's arrogance. She thought about Relthan's foolish mission. She thought about 10,000 years of Dravosi supremacy crumbling to dust because they had underestimated a soft, short-lived species from a small blue world. When she finally returned to the Dravosi homeworld, she did not go to the High Council. She went directly to the public communication networks and made a broadcast that reached every surviving colony. She confessed everything. The High Council tried to stop her, but it was too late. The truth was already spreading. The Dravosi people learned that their leaders had murdered an innocent woman and brought destruction upon their entire civilization as a consequence. Riots broke out on the homeworld. The High Council was dissolved within days. A new government formed from the ashes, led by those who understood that survival now depended on making peace with the humans they had so badly misjudged. The first message the new government sent was to Earth, accepting every demand. The confession. The reparations, the renamed institute, everything. The ceremony took place on a gray morning, 3 years after a woman had died alone in a rented laboratory on the edge of human space. Dignitaries from 37 species stood in respectful silence as the Dravosi representative unveiled the new name above the entrance to their most prestigious agricultural research facility, the Amira Okonkwo Institute for Interspecies Agricultural Development. Cameras broadcast the moment across the galaxy. Commentators struggled to explain how the once mighty Dravosi had been brought so low, why they were now publicly honoring a human scientist most viewers had never heard of, what had really happened during those terrible 2 years of famine and sickness and isolation, and one mentioned the truth. No one knew it, except for those who had lived it. Zura Okonkwo, now 7 years old, stood at the front of the crowd holding her grandmother's hand. She did not fully understand why all these important aliens were saying her mother's name, why they kept bowing to her, why they seemed so afraid and so sorry. She only knew that her mother had been a good person who loved plants and helped people, and that somehow the whole galaxy was finally recognizing that. After the ceremony, a Dravosi official approached her with trembling hands. He introduced himself as the new Minister of Education and explained that his government wished to offer Ms. Zara a full scholarship to any educational institution in Dravosi space. Fully funded for as long as she wished to study, Zara's grandmother looked at him with eyes that held no warmth. She thanked him politely and said they would consider the offer. The minister nodded quickly and retreated, unable to meet her gaze. Across the sector, the Galactic Council debated what to make of the Dravosi collapse. Some called it divine punishment. Others blamed poor agricultural planning or medical incompetence. A few whispered about sabotage, but there was no evidence, no proof, no trail to follow. The humans were helpful and sympathetic throughout every discussion. They offered reconstruction aid. They proposed agricultural partnerships. They suggested medical research collaborations. They were, as always, the kind and generous species that everyone trusted. Only now, there was something different in the way other species looked at them. A wariness that had not existed before. A careful attention to human reactions, human feelings, human satisfaction, and one wanted to be the next species to experience an extraordinary run of bad luck. Commander Relthan, stripped of his rank and his honors, lived out his remaining years on a refugee colony that had once been a proud military world. His lungs never fully recovered. His family name was erased from Dravosi records. His children grew up knowing that their father had killed an innocent woman and doomed their entire civilization. He never spoke publicly about what he had done. But in private moments, when the coughing fits subsided and the silence of the night pressed in around him, he thought about a young scientist tending her plants in a rented laboratory. He had believed she was unimportant. He had believed humans were soft. He had believed the Dravosi were invincible. He had been wrong about everything on Earth. there were no celebrations, no monuments to the operation, no medals awarded, no speeches given, no acknowledgement that anything unusual had occurred. The scientists returned to their normal work. The intelligence officers filed their reports and moved on to other projects. The photographs of Amira Okonkwo were quietly removed from classified facilities and returned to her family. Director Patricia Okafor retired 6 months after the Dravosi confession. She bought a small house by the ocean, far from cities and politics and the endless weight of decisions that shaped civilizations. She tended a garden and watched the waves and tried not to think too much about what she had done. Sometimes, late at night, she wondered if Amira would have approved. If the gentle xenobiologist who had loved alien flowers would have wanted an entire species brought to its knees in her name. She never found an answer, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. No human would be killed without consequence ever again. Every species in the galaxy understood that now. Every government and every military and every ambitious young commander who thought humans were weak would remember what happened to the Dravosi. The lesson had been taught, and lessons, once learned, are not easily forgotten. 20 years later, Zara Okonkwo stood in the laboratory that bore her mother's name, surrounded by alien plants from a dozen worlds. She had become a xenobiologist like her mother, dedicating her life to the same work of understanding and helping and growing things across the boundaries between species. A young Dravosi student approached her nervously, asking for guidance on his research project. Zara smiled at him with her mother's kind eyes and invited him to sit. She did not hate the Dravosi. She did not blame them for what had happened before she could remember. She only wanted to do what her mother had done, make the universe a little better, one small discovery at a time. Outside the laboratory windows, the scarred agricultural fields of the Dravosi homeworld were slowly recovering. Human techniques and human crops were helping them rebuild. Dravosi and human scientists worked side by side, creating something new from the ashes of old hatred. Perhaps that was the real lesson, Zara thought. Not the destruction, not the vengeance, but what came after. Humans could end civilizations, but they would rather help them grow.